All right, this one didn't win the poll, but I believe it came in second place of what show I should do next in this laundry list of episodes we've got planned out here on Old Man Squad Fantasy Basketball. Today, or this afternoon, I should say, is round 2. Who to pick? Because we got some choices to make. We got some closely ADP ranked players, and today we'll give you the Dan choices on which way to go in each of them. Although, really, we're going to talk through most of the players and arrive at a conclusion. So I hope that the great majority of you will not just speed through to get the answers and actually listen to how we get to that final point. I am Dan Vespers. This is Old Man Squad Fantasy Basketball. You can follow on social at Dan Vespers, at Old Man Squad on Twitter and TikTok, Old Man Squad Fantasy over on Instagram as we slowly build those out with our little short videos. Hit the like button. I'd say I beg, but I really do ask. I ask you, please hit the like button if you're watching on YouTube. Think about dropping a comment in there. That's also quite helpful. Subscribe. Definitely do that. And then if you're listening after the fact, those 5-star reviews actually do go quite a long way towards getting our point across here. Today, we're getting into the battles of the second round. And, you know, there's a handful of them. I think, and I don't know, I guess we can make a judgment on this at the end of the show, but in my opinion, other than a few kind of little mini groupings, I have a much stronger preference in the second round of this sort of head-to-head. And a lot of the battles do come in these little small pockets. You know, a couple of guys with an ADP in the 19s, a couple of guys with an ADP at like 22.5 or whatever. And they do somehow end up in this pretty stratified sequence of how the players go. Can't possibly tell you how that happened, and it's still conceivable that as the wind up to the season over the next 22 days and Yahoo redoes their board, I'm sure maybe some of that stuff changes, but that's how it is right now. The second round is almost always a minefield every single year. I would argue this year is a little bit less, at least right now. And maybe the board still shifts and pushes some of my favorites toward the front end of the second round and pushes my least favorite guys towards that, 17 to 24. And then I'm stuck thinking, do I got to go to my third round guys in this range? But right now, there's kind of an option that I like almost every other or every third player or something like that. That is to say, the players that I like in the second round are spaced out a little bit, which is not always the case. Sometimes I like the first 2 players and then no one for 10. And then I like, 7 guys in the third round, but I can't take both of those guys, right? Can I? I mean, you think it through and maybe strategically, you're just trying to figure out a way to get the highest number of players that you like. And so then there's that whole game theory thing of well, I don't like this guy in the second round, but should I take him there anyway? Because I would like him in the third round, even though I like the guy in the third round as a second rounder, and you flip-flop him and whatever. And anyway, we're using the Yahoo second board, revision 2. That's been going for 3.5, 4 weeks now, by the way. So they're about due for today's show. And this discussion, just as a reminder, is largely geared towards head-to-head leagues, but not completely. We'll toss in some roto thoughts, some games cap type of leagues, because that's more the direction you lean with the roto things as we go, at least in terms of why we might take one player over another. Before we get to the first name on the board, today's show is brought to you by our buddies at Bet Online, the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for everything football. Bet Online has every stat, every matchup, and even live odds and spreads to bet on during the games. Think you know your stuff? Get in on the Bet Online $200,000 mega contest by picking 5 games against the spread every week for your chance at weekly prizes and a share of $200,000. And when the game's over, head down to the online casino, get in on a game of blackjack or poker, or unwind with one of over 150 slot games. Head to the website today to get in on the action. Bet Online. The game starts here. Let's commence with the first battle of the second round. Interestingly enough, is actually the last battle of the first round from that show that we did last week, meaning it's Anthony Edwards, who's technically the 12th ranked guy in ADP if you were going by integers only, Kevin Durant, Domantas Sabonis, and I'm throwing James Harden in there. I know his ADP is 19 point something, but let's be honest, he's not going at 19 point something. He's going at 17 or earlier. And with the Kawhi Leonard, although at Media Day, Kawhi was like, I'm hoping to be ready by opening day. And James Harden was like, yeah, we want Kawhi to take it easy. We don't need him to rush back. So we have no idea as of today if Kawhi's playing on opening night, but they aren't going to push him. And so with that news kind of hanging over things, I would expect that Harden becomes part of this first chunk of second round type of players. And so we're going to pick between 4 of them, just the way we did at the end of our first round show. And the results are going to also be the same as they were at the end of our first round show. And that order is, of course, James Harden over Kevin Durant, over Domantas Sabonis, over Anthony Edwards. The thought process on this being, I think James Harden ends up as a guy in 9-cat who's ranked at the very, very, very front end of the second round. And in 8-cat, he very well might be a first rounder this year. And so that one was sort of like an easy call for me because just 9-8-cat straight rankings, I think he wins this battle over the other guys. Durant versus Sabonis was the hardest one for me here because Domantas Sabonis has been a pillar of durability. And he has, as we mentioned last year, like he's a guy who's floated around in that 20 some odd range. I think he was number 30 in 9-cat last year. Obviously, if you punt turnovers, he jumps up the board, but Kevin Durant also had a weirdly high turnover year. And so again, I just kind of went straight rankings on this one. I think KD is going to be better than Sabonis. By totals, they were basically a statistical dead heat last year. Domantas playing in all 82 ball games. You get that nice rebound and assist bump from Sabonis as well as field goal percent. But KD, you get points. You get a positive in assists. Not big, but positive. You get a small positive in threes. You get a positive in steals. You get a positive in blocks. You get a positive in both percentages. I would rather just start with a guy. And I mean, this is not the end of the first round. I guess it's the second round pick now. So there's a little bit of a pairing element at play where you go Sabonis and you get a lot of really good stuff. But depending on who you put him with, like I think a lot of people are going to go Trae Young and Domantas Sabonis together. And you get a really bad turnovers team. And you get a team that's not great at scoring and not great at threes and like middling at rebounds, but very good in assists. So congratulations. But you've built this like weird, well-rounded team that can't block shots. Whereas you go the Kevin Durant route, let's say you're taking that same exact path. You're much better shape in scoring and threes. You're kind of weak in rebounds, but you're in better shape or you're still in okay shape in assists. Not great, not world beater style the way if you went Trae and Domantas Sabonis. You also have the opportunity, Kevin Durant partially canceling out Trae Young's field goal percent. You're a small negative there. Do you want to punt it? You still have an opportunity not to. And you stay very strong in free throw percent, which Sabonis kind of blew a hole in if you're pairing him with Trae. So I get it. I understand why this whole concept of the pairing thing makes a lot of sense. I really do. But taking a Kevin Durant, who, again, if you just assume he's going to be better in overall production, don't worry about it. Think about, like, we hear the word pairing, and in our minds, we're like, well, we need to do it picks 1 and 2. But it can really be sort of this, like, aggregate of your first 4 picks is the first part of the pair, and the second part of your pairing is who you take in the 5th. And I'm not saying you have to push it that far down the board every time, but I really hate the idea of immediately deciding on exactly the 7 players that you must take after you grab your first round pick. Like, you take Trae Young and you take Kevin Durant, you have different paths you can take. You take Trae Young, you take Domantas Sabonis, you don't have that many different paths you can take. You've pretty much iced yourself out on blocks and probably turnovers. Where you go Kevin Durant, what have you iced yourself out on? Rebounds? You can make those up when you take a center. Your assists are still fine. KD's not bad at it. If he was your first pick, that's not where you'd want to start. Anyway, and then Anthony Edwards is the last name on the list for me here because there really wasn't much you could do to Anthony Edwards last year to improve his fortunes from a punt standpoint. He wasn't great at turnovers at 3.1, but it wasn't as bad as some of these other guys going at the beginning of the second round. So, Sabonis and Kevin Durant, who we just talked about, and it'll be James Harden this year. Those guys will get bigger bumps on that front. Edwards is number 28 in a punt turnovers build, but he was fine in field goal percent. He was okay in free throw. He was okay in blocks, pretty good in steals. He was fine in boards and assists, threes, and pretty good in scoring. But there wasn't that sledge coming through the way that these other guys did in something. And for Durant, actually, the sledge was more percentages. Just like the sledgehammer is, I do all the things. And I know he slipped a little bit towards the second half of the year, but I still think Kevin Durant is cruising into top 20, and I don't think Anthony Edwards is. So that's your first grouping. The rest of the stuff on today's show is going to be a head-to-head battle, and the second one is Chet Holmgren and Donovan Mitchell. Chet Holmgren is at 16.8. Donovan Mitchell is at 17.0. So a statistical dead heat. I mean, that's just factually inaccurate. It's not a dead heat. They're separated by 0.2 of a point. Dan. I should call it a figurative dead heat. They're basically as close as you can get without touching, without nuzzling up against one another. And in this one, I don't even have to think about it. It's Donovan Mitchell for me, and it's not even close. I know Chet was good last year, but Chet was really good because he had decent percentages at 53 and 79. He had low turnovers as one of the lowest in the second round, and certainly of the guys being drafted in the second round this year, I think he is the lowest. The other guys around him that had turnovers in that range, Kyrie Irving was at 1.8, which is kind of amazing. Chet was at 1.6, Kyrie was at 1.8, and his assists were more than twice the level, just how efficient Kyrie was. And so much of Holmgren's value was tied up in blocks. A lot of folks, and I think this is a really good exercise to do, the -1 rankings are cool because they rank players by eliminating their worst category. I like to look at the flip side of that too. And for Holmgren, we've talked about this with Victor Wembanyama, if you eliminate their best category, how far do they fall? Chet Holmgren was number 70 last year if you were punting blocks. It's not a fair thing to point and say, oh, well, that's his value to your team. Obviously, his blocks have value, and if you draft Chet, you're likely going to be attempting to be good at blocks this year. Just like with Victor Wembanyama, he falls into the 50s last season if you wipe out his blocks. You can't just do that, and then that's the numbers you're working off of, because, again, you wouldn't draft that player with the goal of punting their best category. It's lunacy. But at the same time, what it does tell us, and that's something that Matt Smith has talked about on this show a few times, is what is the danger of drafting a player whose value is so heavily tied up in one category? What was Donovan Mitchell's best category last year? It was actually steals, by the way, for whatever that's worth. He had a really good steals season. How far does he fall if you punt steals? From 8 to 18. Not from the teens to the 60s? 70, I just said, for Holmgren. That tells you how much more of a buffer Donovan Mitchell has against statistical erosion. If his best category went away, he's still a second rounder on the points, the threes, the boards, the assists, the blocks, the excellent free throw percent, the field goal that didn't kill you despite super high volume last year from a guard spot. This one's Spida. And now, for me, the biggest concern with Donovan Mitchell is not erosion of stats. It's, is he going to be healthy? And that, honestly, we can't know. You know, Chet Holmgren played way more games than Donovan Mitchell did last year. So is that a feather in his cap, or is it an he's due kind of thing? If I had to guess, and you play the odds a little bit on this, I would say odds are Chet Holmgren probably plays in more games than Donovan Mitchell does this year. And that's okay, because I think there's a chance that these guys end up close to one another by totals. Holmgren was number 9 last year because of the ridiculous health. Donovan Mitchell was, somewhere in the 20s. So they kind of flip-flopped, but they were separated by a third of a season. Bring those numbers a little closer together on both ends. Get Donovan Mitchell into the 60s, bring Holmgren down into the 70s, and they're both second rounders. But I'll take the guy who's going big on a per-game basis And if Donovan Mitchell ends up he missed 27 games last year, he was IL'd for a lot of that. You can replace. It's not quite as simple as with Roto Games Cap or any Games Cap where you don't have to play your guy. And obviously it hurts you to not have your top pick, but you're not taking a true zero when they're IL'd. You take a zero when you have too many guys on the IL. That's a different problem altogether, I guess. So Donovan Mitchell for me, and again, this one's really not all that close. Next one on the board is Devin Booker at 19.2, Scottie Barnes at 19.9. This one was the hardest one for me to pick because I think these two guys come at fantasy value from two very, very different directions. And that's not me saying that they have different fantasy games, although they do. But last year, Booker played in 68 ball games. He was hurt right at the beginning of the year, and everybody was like, oh, Devin Booker, he's terrible now. He doesn't stay healthy. Dude, it was a bad start to the year, 100% a bad start to the year. And then he was quite good after missing something like 7, 8, 9 games, I think, right at the beginning. He was almost completely healthy the rest of the way. He was number 16 with 27 points, 4.5 boards, 7 assists, a steal, 0.4 blocks, 2.2 threes, and excellent percentages, particularly for a guard at 49% from the field. Scottie Barnes was right around the corner. He was ranked 5 slots behind Booker. 20 points, 8 boards, 6 assists, 2.8 combined defensive stats, which is very impressive. 1.7 threes, actually not separated by much there. Not great percentages, 47.5 and 78. He was a negative in both. Both guys had medium high turnovers, neither one back-breaking numbers. So what do we think about this coming season? On the Scottie Barnes front, there was a lot of talk of, his assists take a hit when Emmanuel quickly showed up. They actually didn't. They were higher than his full season numbers during the 9 games that those guys actually got to play together when the team was healthy after the trade, and then Barnes got hurt, and then the team pulled the plug on pretty much everybody. So it ain't that. Is it just overall usage fears on Barnes? I mean, maybe. But, they sent guys out to get the guys back. Pascal Siakam was a higher usage dude. OG Anunoby wasn't that high, but in Toronto, he got more to do than he'll get in New York. They brought in RJ Barrett and Emmanuel quickly, and it's a little bit it's bordering on a wash of out versus in Toronto. So I think there's a perfectly reasonable chance that Barnes can kind of replicate what he did last year. The big question on Scottie, I think, is are the blocks real? He was at 1.5 last season after not being anywhere near that first couple of years. So which Scottie Barnes is it? Do you get the Barnes that does block shots? Or you get the Barnes that only kind of block shots? And then with Devin Booker, with Tyus Jones in town, are the assists going to come down? Both of these guys have a little bit, not a cloud over their numbers. I think they're both going to be really, really good. But there are a couple of small question marks for each guy. Here's where I sit. If something goes wrong in a Devin Booker season, and what is that wrong thing? Besides injury, what else could go wrong? Usage drop. That's pretty much the only other thing that could happen. So what are we talking about? Fewer assists? The points probably don't change that much because the guys Phoenix brought in are not there to score more. So what happens if Devin Booker's assists drop from 6.9 back into the 5s? Yeah, he falls. He might not even be a second rounder anymore, but he's still a third. What's a bad case scenario for Scottie Barnes outside of injury? Shutdown is one. Because literally right before we started recording this show, Jakob Poeltl during, what was it? I think it was Raptors Media Day was like, yeah, we're not going to try to win every game this year. Oh, really, Jakob? Okay. So does that mean Barnes is going to play down the stretch? I don't know. That's a medium-sized red flag. All right, that's a bad case scenario. Scottie Barnes skips the end of the season, but maybe his youth means he plays more early and he and Devin Booker end up in roughly the same number of games played. So what's another bad case scenario for Barnes? The blocks go away. What if those go away? Is he a third rounder now? What's a good case scenario for Barnes? Kind of a repeat of this, but an improvement in efficiency. And so when I talk about these two guys coming at their fantasy value from two different directions, there's really no way for Booker to go up. But I also don't see that many ways for Booker to go down. There's really only one small one, and it's the assists. For Barnes, I could see 2 ways he goes down. I could see 1 or 2 ways he goes up. it's a little less locked in. And you know from me, when there's a little bit of uncertainty, even if that means that Barnes might finish higher than Booker on a per-game basis, if things go right for Scottie, he probably has a better season than Devin Booker. I still, you guys know where I'm going now, I still go Devin Booker. If but barely, but I prefer the safer floor, which he has, especially with those nice percentages, as opposed to the Scottie Barnes defensive stat upside. And that's really what he brings to the table that Booker has no chance of catching. But I'm still going Devin, and I wouldn't be mad at you if you went either way. Next battle on the board is Kyrie Irving and Jalen Brunson. We'll get to that after a quick commercial break. Kyrie, 21.1. Jalen Brunson, 21.5. They've gotten closer over this run up to the season. Remember, Kyrie started up at like number 14, and Brunson was down in the early 20s, and they've sort of mooshed together over the last month and a half. Kyrie started at 15.5 ADP. He's down at 21 now. Jalen Brunson started at 20.3. I guess he's dropped a little bit. Not by much, though. He went down by 1, then he came back up by like 0.3 of a point. So he's pretty much been where he's been the whole way through. But in any event, they've certainly gotten closer together, with Kyrie zipping past Devin Booker and Scottie Barnes on the way down the board. So we didn't have to do him for this battle. But this is a fun one, because Devin Booker, if you were like Dan, you went, or Jalen Brunson, I should say, is a lot like Devin Booker from the last discussion. Dan, and you'd have every right to say, Dan, you inconsistent lout, why would you go Devin Booker in the previous one and then shy away from Jalen Brunson the next one? Which maybe I'm tipping my hand a tiny bit here. Well, because with Jalen Brunson and Devin Booker, I think they're looking at very different year-over-year projections. Brunson played more than half of last season as pretty much the only offensive option. Dude was taking 24, 25 shots a game down the stretch. That is not happening this year, with Randall first back and then traded, and now Cat in town. Take the chronology of it. Trading for Mikal Bridges. OG Anunoby starting the season healthy. Like, down the stretch last year, it was Brunson versus the universe. It was Brunson and Dante DiVincenzo. He ain't taking 21-plus shots a game this season. That number's coming down for Brunson, and he was still only number 29 on 21 shots per game. So, like, even if he gets to that number, he still doesn't get to this ADP. He played in 77 games. That's the up shot for Brunson. He was very healthy last year, although he'd been a little bit dinged up prior. So hard to know which way you go. With Kyrie, you kind of know which way you're going, which is he's going to miss 15 to 20 ball games. However, the gap between these two dudes in overall production is way bigger than it appears on paper. Because you look and you're like, well, Jalen Brunson outscored him by 3 points per game last year. Like, and out-assisted him by, 1.5? And so you're reading and you're like, how? I don't understand how these two dudes were so far apart in overall rank. Well, Kyrie kind of slipped by in a few things. He out-rebounded him by 1.5. He had more threes. He beat him up in defensive stats by 0.4 steals per game and 0.3 blocks per game, so 0.7 overall. Shot 50%, Kyrie did. Brunson wasn't bad from the field at 48, but 50, it's a big deal. Brunson, high volume, 84.5% from the foul line. Kyrie, low volume, 91% at the foul line, and low turnovers. And so you kind of look at it and you're like, I don't understand how Kyrie was this much better than Brunson by rank, but you're just going to have to trust me. The math says he was. But how much does injury history and just missed game history factor into this one? Because it has to. Because you're talking about Jalen Brunson, who's going to try at least to play 82 games, and Kyrie, who's probably going to try to play about 68. That's a big, big gap between the two dudes, and it's what makes this discussion so much harder. Honestly, I probably should have set this up to be Kyrie against Brunson and the next couple of guys, because I may take those dudes over Brunson for different reasons. Kyrie is the absolute dice roll of this round because he's going to be a top 10 dude per game. That's just what he does. But if he only plays in 58 ball games, he's going to be a third rounder. Well, maybe I should be more careful about. Yeah, I mean, about that. So Kyrie in 58 games last year what was his totals rank? 27. So early third. If he gets into the low 60s, he probably ties Jalen Brunson. He might even pass him. Brunson was 16 by totals playing in 19 more games than Kyrie. So if that gap comes down to like 14 games, Kyrie probably beats him. And then anything over that, Kyrie wins it. It's a tough math game, but I think at this juncture, because he's fallen so far, my choice is Kyrie Irving. Because you just like, at the end of the second round, third round, whatever, there's only going to be 1, 2, maybe 3 guys on the board where you're like, this guy could actually be a first rounder per game in 9-cat. And with Kyrie, he's literally done it for multiple seasons, sort of in a row. There was some goofball stuff going on in there for Kyrie over the last half decade. But basically, when he's been out there and trying, he's a first round per game guy. And it's rare that you can get that at the end of the second round or deeper when, like, we know Kyrie's going to miss ball games. We don't know how it's going to happen. But we also know that he's not set to sit every single back-to-back, at least not at the beginning of the year. I don't like the finals run. That's a little bit disconcerting. It's a lot of mileage on the legs in the shorter offseason. So it is reason to be a little bit pessimistic. But again, getting him in the 20s now, dude was 27th. Again, I'll say it, in totals in 58 games last year. And if you can get him around 21, it just takes a couple extra games to beat that. And again, even if he reproduces last season, he's basically right around his ADP. I think we got 2 left at this point. Damian Lillard, 22.8. LeBron James, 23.3. This one is one that's also not super close to me, and maybe it should be, but LeBron played in 71 games last year. I can't imagine that happens again. Almost every game that the King missed was due to rest last season. Not all of them, but most. They were basically tied in totals. Dame played 2 more games than LeBron. They're both getting older, season over season. LeBron had an all-world shooting year, and Dame had a down shooting year. So at least in my mind, I'm looking at this, I'm going, okay, LeBron's going to be 40. Dame is also pretty old, but he ain't going to be 40. They both played 35 minutes a game last year. If the Lakers get off to a better start, they'll probably try to keep that number a little lower for LeBron. I don't think it changes all that much for Dame. Dame could very well shoot 44% instead of 42.5. LeBron could very well shoot 52% instead of 54. It's the kind of thing that you wouldn't even really blink an eye at if you weren't deep diving fantasy numbers. So give me Damian Lillard. I think he plays more than 2 games above LeBron this season, maybe more like 4 or 5. Their per game numbers are probably almost exactly the same after LeBron beat him by about a half round this past year. I think they come together there. And so all those little things add up to Damian Lillard being my choice for this battle between 2 aging players at the back end of the second round. But I do, for what it's worth, I do kind of like them both. The LeBron appears to be ageless. At some point, it's going to catch up, and then we're going to be like, whoops. But until that time, it feels a bit foolish to fade LeBron James. 30 seasons in, and he's still going to be proving that time doesn't impact him. I don't know how he's doing it. I really don't. But he had his best, he had his second most efficient season ever last year at age 39. What the hell are we doing here? So you got these 2 old guys. It's not really a battle of who can hold on more. It's really more of a look at who had an opportunity to be better than last year, and that's Dame. LeBron almost has nowhere to go but a little bit down. And finally, De'Aaron Fox and LaMelo Ball, the last 2 flavors here in the second round. Fox with an ADP of 25.4, LaMelo Ball at 26.5. LaMelo figures to do basically what he did last year. The Hornets didn't make any massive sweeping changes to the roster, other than just sort of trying to be healthy this year. They didn't have LaMelo for most of the season. They didn't have Mark Williams for most of the season. That team was largely Miles Bridges and Brandon Miller last year. And they are largely Miles Bridges and Brandon Miller, plus Ball and Williams going into this year, provided Mark Williams is actually healthy to start the season. LaMelo last year was at 24 points, 3 threes, 5 boards, 8 assists, 2 combined steals and blocks. Most of that was steals at 1.8. bad field goal, good free throw, super high turnovers. 22 was the rank in 9 category leagues if you happen to be punting turnovers. LaMelo jumps up to number 11, which is kind of an impressive leap considering a lot of these guys have high turnovers. And if you're punting turnovers and field goal percent, LaMelo Ball was number 7 last year. Was there anything you could do to De'Aaron Fox to get him into that same category? The answer is sort of. You could punt free throw, and that moved Fox up to 11, but there wasn't really a second category that he was that bad at that would change his fortunes much. Like, you could do field goal too. That got him up to 8. That's close, I guess, to where we got LaMelo. But also, here's the thing. I'm not convinced that De'Aaron Fox is going to get 2 steals a game this season again. That was a career high. I'm also not convinced he's going to take 21 shots a game this season. That was a high because they brought in DeMar DeRozan to try to lighten the load a little bit. So these two guys who were very close together in per game rank, almost a dead heat. Like, they were ranked 22 and 24, but it was almost a tie. Obviously, Fox played in 52 more games, so you kind of have to throw that out the window if you're even considering LaMelo Ball. But between these two guys, Ball feels primed to basically stay the same year over year, and Fox looks like a guy who's going to take a small step back. And if you think these games played numbers are anywhere close to one another, you probably have to take a swing on LaMelo Ball because he fits a lot of team builds. And I don't know, there's just this, like, the turnover thing. So many teams punt turnovers that if you do it 2, it doesn't hurt you that much, and it gets him all the way up to 11. Not that many teams punt free throw. Usually 2. 1 or 2 max, I would think. A Giannis team, and then someone else probably ends up doing it also, like a Luka team or whatever. But like with LaMelo, you turn off turnovers. You know, what if you got a player in the first round who wasn't that high in turnovers? You could kind of swallow those down and then end up kind of even with some of these other clubs. So I between these two guys, I do lean to LaMelo Ball, which I realize might be dumb because Fox might play 35 more games than LaMelo this year. I have to have some small measure of confidence that Ball's going to stay on the floor to make this ruling, and I do. So I think Fox had his best year that he could possibly have last season. I don't think that that's going to happen again. He slides back down into the 30s on a per-game side. I'll take the per-game upside of Ball and hope that that doesn't ruin my team when he misses half the season again. All right, that is your second round ADP battles here on this lovely, what the hell is today? Monday afternoon, the last day of September. A reminder, folks, if you have thoughts on any of this stuff, please throw them in the comments section. For those that are watching, if you didn't do it earlier, hit the like button. Subscribe, no matter how you're taking in the content. That is just critically important to everything we're doing here at Old Man Squad. And follow on Twitter at Dan Bespris. Definitely that one, because we're about to be, once the season starts and we're doing like every fast-paced pick up and drop and hold and all this stuff, that's all going on over on Twitter every second of every day. Yeah, obviously we're going to keep doing shows, and I love that you guys do these because that's actually better for the growth of Old Man Squad. But Twitter's the hub. That's where I can send you guys Old Man Squad, the network feed on Twitter and on TikTok, Old Man Fantasy over on Instagram. I don't actually know what show we're going to do first tomorrow. I do know that we've got some guest stuff kicking around. Thunder Dan will be one of our shows tomorrow. I think is Stock coming on tomorrow? Oh, we might just double up on our guests. That would make life easy, wouldn't it? Break down some mock drafts, talk about some strategy. Yeah, that's good stuff. All right, we're wrapping it up. I'm Dan. I'm out for the day. See you guys tomorrow.